Hello, everyone. Thank you, IBM community, for having Chris, Jessica, and I in conversation with each other. It's been both expansive and reaffirming for me to be in dialogue with thoughtful artists and community engagers over the course of this fellowship. My name is Zeina Baltagi. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm wearing a short sleeve button up with orange, green, and tan abstract pattern. My waist up is visible to the camera, and I have light pale brown skin, short medium brown curly hair, and gold rimmed glasses on. I'm seated on a chair against a white wall with a glass commercial door to my right and a whiteboard behind me. Sometimes you'll see people walking through the door. I was born in the land of the Northern Valley Yokuts people, specifically the Central Valley Miwok tribe. And I'd like to acknowledge their ancestors and current people who live in those areas, commonly known as Stockton, California. I was raised in between Yatakumnil area and El Minya and Beirut. I am ancestrally from northern Lebanon, El Minya, and I work and live out of the original native land of the Gabrielino, Tongva, or Tataviam people known as Los Angeles, California. I'm tuning in from and seated on the land of the Muncie Lenape people in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, New York. And I am committed to using my blessings and privileges in education and art practice in service to uplifting the people directly around me, as I am a guest on this land. I am obliged to operate with care. I'm excited to share conversation with Jessica and Chris. As a curatorial team, Jessica Wimbley and Christion developed a series of curatorial projects contextualizing the visual arts within biomythography. I was curated into biomythography, secret poetry and hidden angers in 2014, where I had the meaningful relationship with them developed and ever since kind of continuously bonded. You could see biomythart.com. We'll place it into the chat box. And I want to have Chris and Jessica introduce themselves, and I'll send the mic over and mute myself so they can introduce their wonderfulness.
Right on. My name is Jessica Wimbley. I'm an artist curator located out of Sacramento, California. I have brown skin, a short dark brown afro that's fluffy, gold rimmed octagon glasses, a tiger claw earring in my right ear, and a black mock turtleneck short sleeve top on. I'm seated in my dining room with dark brown wood molding and artwork in the background with light coming in on the left side from a window and a table in the background with a sculpture.
My name is Christion. I am an artist, curator, and educator, also based in Sacramento. I am wearing a black collarless shirt with this beautiful corded necklace that is a gift from my wife. I am dark-skinned and bald-headed with salt and pepper beard. And I am also sitting next to Jessica in the living room. Glad she described it because I would have got the orientation wrong.
Thank you both for being here with me. Oh, what are your pronouns?
Her, hers, she.
He, him, his.
Sweet. Well, I'm excited to have conversation with both of you. We having a free-flowing conversation. We're thinking about like the years that you've kind of known me, and so you've seen threads within the work that I myself may be doing that I don't even see directly sometimes until someone kind of holds a mirror to that, and you're like, oh my gosh, that is what I've been doing this whole time. And they're like brilliant at like really unwrapping things really thoughtfully, and so I'm just grateful to like do that with you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for making your work. Your work has been exciting to look at ever since I first did a studio visit with you over a decade ago, which is crazy to think that so much time has gone by, but it's been such a pleasure to see you and your practice grow throughout that time. And so one of the things I was first thinking of is when we actually curated you into biomythography, secret poetry, and hidden angers, and thinking about how you're engaging very much in this labor-intensive craft process in which you were reusing, repurposing materials and really linking your conceptual ideas with the interpretation of these physical sculptural objects. And I'd love to just hear you speak a little bit more to that early part of your process where you're engaging in labor, but you're also engaging in collecting and building an archive. It was an archive that you're building from your personal lived experiences that were almost like a documentation of the labor that you were doing, and that connection to language, because there were newspapers that you're using as part of that process. So I'd love for you to just speak a little bit more to that particular piece and how you went to making it.
Yeah. I could screen share that piece
Yeah,
actually.
that would be
That would be
great.
awesome.
And I'm gonna just screen share it directly off of the exhibition, because I was like, it was like one of the most pivotal like turning points in my entire art practice, where it's like you do a thing and then you figure out how to unwrap it later.
Uh-huh.
And that's what happened here. So like this, it was in Secret Poetry and this one, and then Cal Lutheran, but oh wait, here, let me find a even better one. So, yeah, I'm bad at screen sharing. Trying to go to this. All right.
I love the unicorn, by the way. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
You know, it's
Here we
like,
go. Wreckage.
I mean, that's the whole point, is to like make it yourself, your own, and like to show yourself in your work. And like that was a huge pivotal point. Not that like the unicorn represents me, but kind of. But um within this work, I like was really wanting to be honest with myself. Like it was a huge point of like, I'm unwrapping my own personal story, but I really want to unwrap what's happening in the present and like archive what's happening there. And at this point in my life, I'm working at a gas station and exchanging myself, a human being, with every single person that comes through that station. And a lot of my work has that like, and I've realized it with whatever like thing I'm collecting, you realize that over time, but like it's always been through so many people's hands, and like a direct exchange between me and this other person's hand. And whether it be like lottery tickets and scratchers in the case here, or whether it be like the penny or something like that. So there's like an exchange happening between me in contact with another human. So at the front of when I'm at the cash register, I could say like every single lottery, this is made completely of lottery tickets and scratchers that I collected. Because essentially with the winning scratchers, they just toss them afterwards. They take the cash and maybe the receipt, right? And then in the end, you do paperwork, and then all the scratchers just get shredded. So I just collected those over not even that long, maybe like 2 months, and collected like 3 hefty trash bags. And to me, thinking about these are like very small winnings, very small earnings. And in relation to myself at that time of like, feeling like I'm chipping away to what I want my future to be. I'm to mobilize myself, and like within that, I'm constantly thinking like the construct of like the free throw. At that time, I was coming off this work from like me thinking about the basketball court and thinking about how like so many people get like an extra free throw to life, and some don't. And depending on ability, race, gender, and how you're perceived. So within that, I collected all that lottery tickets and scratchers associated with that. I am an Arab Muslim woman too, and in associations, many constant stereotypes of being associated with gas or oil. There's no oil in Lebanon, by the way, like at all. But there's just like that notion over the whole nation and this like wreckage that comes through it. So like there is always like I feel like this point of contradiction, but like survival as like Arabs that work liquor stores or gas stations too, or Muslim Arabs too. We don't really drink alcohol, and like the oil industry has like really screwed us in many ways. So like all that, I'm just working at the gas station. So I'm collecting all the scratchers and lottery tickets. I took my car tire. It's all association directly back to my body. So my hand is exchanged within all of these, the car tires from my car, me traveling back and forth to work and school, and then like making these paper molds made of construction of that. The association of like my culture and like being Arab, I did that by just inserting in newspaper articles from the Al Jazeera and like Arab newspapers and New York Times, and just kind of fluffed up the paper as well, because you know I needed more than the scratchers that were really like made of plastic and color. So just paper making technique wise,
Mhm.
more metal cellulose, that's more like raw wood pulp that didn't have as much ink. And then that the newspaper really did that. And so it was like all completely 100% made of scratchers, lottery tickets, and that exchange, and newspapers.
I think that's another part I find really interesting is kind of your paper making background and how it melds so well kind of with the thought of you're collecting these kind of basically debris of personal exchanges or interactions, and also debris of the, you know, what would be cast off of things that are directly from your life, and
Yeah.
then repurposing them and reusing them, and weaving them into this whole new thing, which has a this connection with paper baking, kind of recycling, reusing.
Yeah.
Um, does that history kind of, or your background or experience in that, um, inform a lot of your practice, and just kind of the labor even associated with that as a technique and craft?
Yeah. I am hugely labor oriented when it comes to like from start to finish of like any work, and that comes to material, to idea, to like imagery, like everything just kind of needs to have it's all information. So and to me, like when a viewer is looking at something, like every single aspect of information says something and is relevant. And that's something that like I'm constantly thinking about, like even when it comes down to like the way it's not the contraptions used in the hanging. So this is like to me like baby work because it's great, but I'm also like I hung them from fishing line. What does that mean? That's information that's in there that I like kind of ignored the time that I would reassess and be like, was fishing line the best way to go? Because that also says something about fishing tires and something like that. So like everything always matters. And paper making was like my into sculpture and everything that I'm doing. When it came to like performance, like paper making just was like the brain, like it, like my brain just, I am hugely fragmented. Let me restart that
Yeah.
sentence. I'm hugely fragmented as a person and in my thoughts. And paper making allowed me to actually put that within one body. So just like I am one body holding all of these fragments, paper can be seen as a body once it becomes formed as a sheet. And like all of that comes forward together. And when I was printmaking, this was like 2010 or so, like I'm like what in my like early 20s, 18, 19. I'm like making prints and unwrapping things for myself and my scars and my personal story, and like hugely things that like to me my art is my therapy too, so it's like really personal stuff. and as an Arab person, and I'm realizing I'm printing it on French cold press paper.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Lebanon was colonized by France, not really be like colonial, but whatever, but like what the irony is, I'm putting myself, my heart, my body on French paper, and that like that said something like huge to me, like that, like that's information there that I didn't intend to be in there, but it is in there, and it's in contradiction to what I'm putting on that paper. So like I need to make the paper, but I'm still actually making paper in a Western format. So there's Eastern ways of making paper and Western ways of making paper. And I'm using a Western way of making paper of like pulling the pulp through screen mesh. And there's Eastern ways of making paper where they lay the fibers more into a gridded pattern. And so I'm still referencing Western paper making actually by doing it in the format that I'm doing it. But I'm making it myself, and I'm in control of the things that I put in it. And that's when I started to like, that's when the big aha moments happen. And
Yeah.
like, and it like translated. So with everything else, whether I'm making paper or not, I'm still doing the collecting and the chain mailing together of all of the things, or like the pulping together, and then like activating it and performing in it, or whatever the hell I'm doing in it.
Well, part of what I love about this work, and especially because it's an early piece, right? As we start moving on into your practice and thinking about, okay, you're realizing that this paper making, it's really in the process of making it and how it's composed has a very beautiful conceptual connectivity to intersectionality and the exchange and the accumulation of exchanges that happen that help inform identity, which is, I think, something that's interesting about the different perspectives of the paper, of what you're using to create the paper, that, you know, your hand is that the catalyst and meeting point that's bridging those ideas and those stories together. And I love the idea of physically so much of the hand being engaged, whether it be from the transfer of the source material between you and a customer, to you then using your hand to engage in this labor of making the paper. There's bodies constantly involved. The work is very physical, and there's a very visceral, physical history that is being captured and reinterpreted, a reinterpretation of the objects in ways that are, I think, are really quite stunning and beautiful. And frankly, that I think it was pretty advanced for the time that you made it.
Thanks. Especially,
I
I was like, what, 23? So this was a decade ago, right? So yeah, 23.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
this was a really important piece, because then I think about how the physicality of the work moved from the object and to the body, and how you start engaging the body in different ways in terms of the labor within your work, and how the object was kind of like the remnants of your performance. Now you're getting more into actual physical performance, engaging your own body. And I'd love to for you to speak about that transition of labor of making an object to the labor of engaging in performance with your body.
That's such a good question, because to me, it's like the micro, the macro, where I'm constantly, it's me and the public. So like, I always bring it back to myself, and then I need to go back and connect to people, and I need to connect to everyday people. Like, so sometimes when I do things like in gallery settings, stuff like that, it kind of, sometimes it creates a connection, sometimes it doesn't, but like generally it's just everyday people. Activation of space is like what it is performance for me or something. And so like an example is that car tire, that is my car tire, like from my car that I drove around all of the San Fernando Valley and the LA County in Southern California to all these places that I've worked, carries all that information, just like my shoe, the bottom of my shoe does wherever I walk. And then taking that car tire and then connecting it to the gas station and all the people through there. And then when that work ended, I needed to bring it back to myself because I was like back in and then bring it back to myself. So I took that car tire and of course that the tires that's in that installation actually and put it, I basically just put it back on my car because it's like my working tire. So I just used it for the mold and then put it back on the car and then drove it back around and then took that car tire and then I drove it over a gray jersey dress. And it was like my first attempt at performance. And I just, my friend had a scrap of long gray jersey and I was like, that's perfect. I don't know, but something's happening here. I'm going to transfer it this to needs something next step. So I just drove it over the gray jersey and then you do things before you could even understand what you're doing. And I'm realizing making essentially a very huge hijab, even though I didn't realize it. I just wanted to invisibilize myself. Because at that point, I'm thinking about not just myself in association to the gas station, to driving to the car, which I have a intimate relationship with, me and walking. And which is also another intimate relationship, which I'll just share. I have a endo prosthetic titanium leg. So I'm upright and I'm very privileged and lucky that I have like, I am upright and walking, but I can't like run away from like bad situations hard. I can't, and like, it's difficult for me to be on foot. So it's just like an impairment. And thinking as I'm walking around LA too, who gets the most run over, who gets like road traffic victims essentially, and I'm thinking about the people around me directly, because I stopped working at the gas station. I graduated from undergrad. I left to Los Angeles. I'm in LA now, and again, my work's about me and my direct surroundings. I'm walking around LA and realizing who's the most victim to like road traffic being run over. It's like the working class, they're on their feet, the houseless folks, they're on the street. And then also thinking about the sidewalk itself. So I moved off of the street and moved onto the sidewalk and thinking like what the sidewalk is, you know? And I think a lot of people have really thought about the sidewalk as public space. What does that mean? Like I think Pope L did in his crawl piece across Broadway, the history of the sidewalk. Instinctually, I didn't even know, like y'all did that studio visit with me. I had this dress and those tires, but this was just like a thing hanging there. Like, I don't know what I was doing with it. But then I just like wore it and then I walked on the sidewalk and like completely anonymously by myself and then like did a prayer on the street. And then went home and did that a few times. I didn't know what I was doing, why I was, but I just did it, no cameras. And then at some point I was like, oh, there's something here, and filmed it. Like, and that's when I was like able to see myself, what I was doing, actually. Was when it got filmed and I made it, it was kind of like a music video of the thing. 'Cause I was like, how do I capture this thing as performance in a film? But it's the moment it's gonna be on film, it's no longer, I don't know, activating the thing. It's now a performance for camera, a performance for audience, you know? And for me, it's like prayer, you do it by yourself, you know, you don't really do it for an audience per se. So over time essentially did that and thinking when in Islam, I didn't like later as I've been doing it, realizing that in Islam, when one person prays in a household, the whole household becomes blessed. Whether it's Muslim or not, or whatever, the whole house gets that blessing of that prayer, of those good vibes of protection. So, and realizing the sidewalk is like one big long house of houseless folks, like to pray on any corner of that sidewalk kind of is an act of like my own little prayer like for the people that are on that sidewalk, that walk down it, that live on it, that interact on it, including myself. So that is that whole action, is like, took my car tire, made the gray jersey, and then walked around and was really thinking about initially being the anonymity in the city, kind of being a sculpture standing there and like walking and being still. And I thought that was the performance. But then as I filmed, I was like, oh, I'm praying. And then admitting that I'm praying on the street, and then like putting that in the, like, writing it out and like, oh yeah, that is what I'm doing. But I just had a hard time sharing that, I think, because it's hard to share prayer. Sorry, I'm ranting.
No,
No.
and I think, for me, I think one of the things I find of interest is the way in which your practice works. You seem always willing to kind of follow the thread of interest in your own intellectual curiosity. And if you hit another thread going in another direction, you don't get upset. You just follow both threads.
Yeah,
And,
I do.
and then you're able to kind of similarly kind of take all these kind of parts and sort of form them together into something that can also kind of mold and evolve into something different in a different medium, be that a different just form. So.
And I think with performance, I mean, there's always the information that you get as the performer in the real time
Yeah.
of the performance that's going to give you a certain amount of information. And a lot of that is very psychological. What does it feel to embody this form that you're taking? And how are people responding? Because you're just existing in space. It's not necessarily for an audience. It's about being able to engage in public so that it does have it has a different the piece has a different relationship to audience than a gallery in which the audience is like a very defined audience, and the space is very defined in that way, that it's a space for art. I think the challenge of going out into the public and claiming and demarking these different spaces as a space where art can happen, and considering that you're dealing with spaces and issues and with people who are often marginalized within this public realm, I think is an important part of the piece. I mean, there's this beautiful element of being in this gray that's like the color of concrete, it's like you're being almost in camouflage in an urban environment, and that being an important element within the performance and giving movement to otherwise fixed spaces, and landscapes, which I think is important. Because again, look at that. It like blends perfectly with, it's like if these streets could talk, if the streets were talking,
I think it's
like
it's also it's about a sense of presence. It's like, and even from moving from the kind of paperwork, the tire, where you're taking remnants of things that are stained or imprinted with this kind of history of interaction,
and literally embodying it.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the thing that's
literally
it's very cheeky, and I'm there for it. It's like, you're like, what? You want me to embody? Yo, I will embody, and I will take it literally, and I will take it to the streets. Which I think is a really bold provocation. And I think it's really interesting to then see what happens when you take that step as an artist, and you start pushing the medium, and you start pushing the concept and your idea of performance. And now when you're talking about bodies, what does it mean to embody something, and to do that within performance? And what type of landscape, space, audience can this happen and operate in? So I think this is a very important kind of experiment in thinking about how do I as an artist embody these ideas? You've ghosted objects, right? And now you're the vessel
The
for
literal it.
things.
And how
Yeah.
does the public then respond to those things when kind of brought to them?
Yeah.
Things that they might, you know, have ignored, gone about, you know, purposely ignoring. Um, when they,
You're right.
you know, encounter it in real time, in real space.
Well, and it's interesting too, because you made yourself both highly visible and
Invisible.
invisible at the same time. And that, like, is that not the experience of marginalized people
Mhm.
or underrepresented people in spaces? Or, you know, that dichotomy is something that is present, you know,
Mhm.
in that lived experience. And so I think you did a really kind of beautiful interpretation of picking up on those things.
Yeah. Um, you're totally like right on. Like I wanted to become the street essentially. Like, you know, like the tire receives the information of everywhere I've been, and where I stand and walk. When I stand on it, it now receives me on that, plus everything that's happened on it, whether I could see it or read it. It's in that thing. And so like to become the street itself, then I could receive that information. But I think you hit on something really big, was to it is bold to take it to the street, because without the gallery, there's no like frame.
Mhm.
You're just on the street. But that's the point of
Right.
me. That's the huge part of vulnerability that I think that I terrifies me, but I chase it for some reason. And so like I don't think there's been a moment that I performed this that I didn't cry my eyes out inside of it, like behind the veil, because it's like hugely vulnerable to like both see and not see what's happening around you. And when you half see through the pattern, the jersey, like your other senses are now heightened, you know, like your sense of touch and smell, and like, and I'm operating on all of my other senses without as strong a sense of sight.
Mhm.
So like to operate that within the space creates just a huge amount of vulnerability, and then on it with like strangers. And I found that like it's really interesting, but this work, I mean, I think it's the vulnerability with working class folks around me. I felt okay, like somewhat safer. But like when I have had to do this for like a gallery setting or in many like more contrived settings, um, there's more senses of people actually messing with you and stuff. I think that like on the street, like you could see it in that video that I showed,
Mhm.
that like that was not exactly like planned like actors in any way. It was more like I just walked up to them with the head nod of, "Are you down with being videotaped? I know I look creepy. Are you cool with this?" And then I would just walk through. And it just was received really well. I've realized on the street, my work for some reason, and not just because, but I think that's because that's where it's where my intention is coming from and my heart is. And so I think that like just kind of operating with my heart that way has produced like my
Well,
best
it's
work.
organic to the piece too.
Organic. It's just like
Yeah,
real.
like the street is the organic place and home in which this work manifests.
Yeah. And it's
Uh,
not any street either. Like it's my street corner. Like that was all filmed within the 1 block radius of my house. That church here is at the end of my house. This is
mhm.
the dollar store that I walk to right next door. So like I'm not going far outside of myself. Just to know
Mhm.
that. Like the gas station is where I worked. When I say street, I mean like outside my door.
Mhm. And that's important too, because that literally is like your home.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's your own personal relationship to the space is different, and operates differently than a gallery space would, and you doing that performance.
Even the presence of your history lives in that space.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then so then you move from sidewalk, and it's funny, I think about 2020 and I'm like, what a time to come through grad school and have to deal with the pandemic and the social unrest. That was a lot to a crazy situation to work under, but I love that you continued this idea of the sidewalk, because all of a sudden, now how we operate in public space with each other has drastically kind of changed. And, when I was thinking about my own experiences of walking on sidewalks during that time, but in general, a lot of times people won't make room for us. They expect us to get out of the way, and that they have priority to the public space. And then we might, if we're lucky, have secondary access or right to the space. So the politics of walking on the sidewalk and who's entitled to have space or who is supposed to make space it's like you're always playing chicken, I feel sometimes, when you're a Black person walking down the street, just because people will not share space. It's ridiculous. But with the 6 feet of distance, you started seeing, new ways of people moving. And so when you went into the sidewalk and talking about mobility, because the other thing too that's loaded in this, talking about embodiment and then getting to this idea of mobility, I love how you're dealing with the representation of the sidewalk. And then what did the sidewalk mean during that time? What does it mean to walk it? Who's walking it? Break down that piece for me, because it's such a lovely transition between your performance piece and then going back to the sidewalk and engaging with it in a different way.
Hell yeah. That is huge. Let's go to the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Literally just called it the sidewalk. I'm very straightforward to the work.
Do you like that nice flow where we're talking outside in the sidewalk and we're like, okay, let's keep kicking it to the streets. Let's take it there.
Well, yeah, no, it's all good. Someone working behind me at the same time. It's all good. I found my little corner, and it's also a work corner. Anyways, so within the sidewalk, I'm like, okay, I've literally walked on the sidewalk, I've prayed on the sidewalk, I've been laid on the sidewalk, but this is post grad school. I was taking also, there's a lot of things happening within this work. So all the fragments that I think about, I had no choice but merging them back together. It became a startlingly moment where I'm just almost mentally self-harming myself by not really addressing all components that I'm really thinking about. So and there's a lot of things happening at once, and everyone started to have to really address themselves and their vulnerability interaction when they interact with other human beings, when they walk on the street or walk on a sidewalk or walk into a grocery store. And then also at the same time, there's racial unrest between both white fragility and Black Lives Matter, and huge things that are happening there. There's a pandemic, and where do I fit in all of this, and how do I interact as a decent human being? And I need to unwrap that. So it just became a huge moment of, I'm graduating from grad school. I'm doing this so that I could essentially one day teach or professor myself, economically mobilize myself from working class labor to intellectual labor. And I started to get really smart, and with a lot of took a wonderful sociology class with Professor Bruce Haynes, who is a New Yorker that is a professor at UC Davis. And he strikingly told me how, like, and we're talking about racial, essentially, like I was trying to address how, like, there's different spectrum to racial privileges depending on how you're perceived, but also like and how that could actually mobilize and change, like it could literally like move over time, and how you can see amongst like persecuted once Protestant white folks to Italians to Polish, like as immigrants have moved into the States as whether refugee or not, have like have had the ability to move or assimilate or move closer to whiteness, with the exception of depends on the darker pigment of your skin and Black folks. So like, and within that, really trying to hold myself accountable. Where do I fit in that as a Middle Eastern Muslim woman? It's not like I haven't received, of course, like discrimination or even pressed moments, but in relation to others, how does that move me forward? So I was thinking, just like Italians or Jews in America, Arab Americans need to kind of check themselves before they wreck themselves. And so I'm thinking about that kind of racial mobility. So at this point, I'm thinking not just about my physical body, how it moves in space when it interacts with others, but my own economic and racial mobility as I'm graduating from grad school. And I'm really used to doing a lot of invisible labor. And this was a really poetic moment because graduate thesis was completely almost invisible. We did this whole thing. I built this, I made 2 sidewalks. I made one called, and I was like, what kind of sidewalk I was going to make? First of all, you need to ask yourself that. Okay, I want to make a sidewalk. What kind of sidewalk? And what is the sidewalk that's going to encapsulate all of these different ideas? And I'm trying to address all these things of like racial economic mobility, my own physical ability to move on the sidewalk, who is the sidewalk for, who gets to walk on it. And within that moment, literally Ahmaud Arbery was murdered on the sidewalk, jogging in his own neighborhood. So who gets to like literally jog or walk in their own neighborhood? Like it's so like I get chills and scared, you like thinking about all these things that happened all at once. And that I was somehow that I was doing this at the same time. But the cul-de-sac is something that I was like, that's the sidewalk I'm going to build out of all the sidewalks. The cul-de-sac is a huge part of America, track houses and cul-de-sacs. So how am I going to address all these things, ideas, my physical mobility, racial economic, all that? So like the cul-de-sac is like a huge place for white flight that it was created for. And it was like a part of like the idea of where like white women hysteria kind of stemmed from, was the start of the cul-de-sac and these tract housings. And who gets to live in those cul-de-sacs became like a very policed kind of thing. So like in the cul-de-sac itself, like to have a house at the tip of that like sack, you know, is like a huge surveillance moment. Like you get to see who enters and exits out. There's only one entryway and one exit out, which is like this ominous thing. So it became like, what kind of sidewalk? Of course, I'm gonna build, you know, you have to narrow it down as an artist. I'm not gonna build like, you know, what am I gonna do? So the cul-de-sac became like the thing that I think that carried all of that information. And then as myself, as a first generation person, I was born here. My parents immigrated here in '83 because of the war in Beirut. And my mother's whole dream was like, her whole work, like, so one day we're going to get to a nice house. Potentially, maybe even in a cul-de-sac.
A house in the suburbs.
The suburbs, right? With the gate, or like, you know, and that's like really a huge part of the American dream that like lures brown folks too, is to like get to that, which also allows you to disengage from your own issues too. Like it's like you can disengage into this wonderful space. So a place for white flight, women, white lady hysteria, born, American dream kind of carrot at the end via cul-de-sac. And Black folks don't even get to like walk down it, even if they like own houses on it. Like, so it's just like all this stuff needed to be addressed. And no one's watching me anyways. I'm in grad school and pandemic. So let's just do the really scary thing and do it. And I found this bay leaf tree, and this is where like I love that y'all are, and I make multiple points of entry into the work. This is where like the art historical part in is the story of like Daphne and Apollo. The whole story. So this is a cul-de-sac wrapped around a bay leaf tree in Davis, California. We're never gonna have a show, so I convinced them to lay concrete here. And the story of Daphne and Apollo is that, here's the cliff notes. Daphne is Apollo was really into Daphne, and Daphne was not into Apollo. Apollo wanted to like, yeah, and Daphne was like, oh no, cliff note version, I swear, went to her father, the river god, and said, will you turn me into a tree so I don't have to be with Apollo? And he's all like, yeah, and turned her into a bay leaf tree. And I thought, like, very cliff note, there's a whole bunch of statues marbled in Greece and Italy and places about being Apollo. And essentially she was turned into a bay leaf tree, and then Apollo took her twigs, which are literally like, I could imagine to be like her limbs, because now she's a tree. Like it's like you took her arms and her legs and then turned her into the reef. Her leaves are the reefs that is his crown and all the imagery. So like, what a story of a woman that wanted autonomy and freedom and decided to fully root herself completely into the ground. And in the end, like Apollo took her twigs and then fashioned himself aesthetically with them as a crown. And like, I was like, this is where the cul-de-sac needs to go. It needs to wrap up.
The status, right? And so it's like, what are you willing to kind of devour for the status or the accomplishment of the dream, or to be in that space? What type of kind of cultural cannibalism has to take place in order for you to be there?
And what outlets do you have?
And within that freedom is entrapment.
Because I do think there's something interesting just in the kind of relation to, because I think of, you know, I don't think much of the cul-de-sac in relation to my own experience, other than it's a space that I often just went in and kind of filtered out of. And that how, in a sense, it worked for me. It was like a space, okay, I'm in the wrong spot and I need to turn around.
But that's the thing I'm pointing out.
And then there's like this idea, I think, of the corner as being the space of interaction and exchange. So it's nice to see, you know, that put in kind of visualized, because I've always, in kind of a relation to particularly Black and urban culture, seen the kind of corner as this place of exchange, this place of intersection, and not thought in terms of how the cul-de-sac and the kind of spatial interaction and relationship that even I had, you know, in my own lived experience with it, that didn't think about it as a child, you know, but that is kind of what I treated it like. It was not a space that you necessarily felt comfortable being in my experience, kind of running around. It's kind of this loop that filtered you out of the neighborhood.
Yeah, that's exactly, enter, exit, literally. Enter, exit immediately.
You did live there, and it wasn't even a place for you.
Only place to exit.
Yeah.
But not stay.
Yeah.
Is it that the middle class experience?
Yeah. It's like, so yeah, you can literally like slip right through immediately. You get to the cul-de-sac and then it's gone, or
then you're gone, then you're out.
I like to treat it better. It's kind of like the golden handcuff.
We're getting close to the end, but I'd like to share more sidewalk. I made 2 cul-de-sacs. I mean, one that was an install, and I was like, I made an extra one. I mean, not really. I made another one in my studio, And then I started playing around thinking, what can I embed inside it? Because it's like paper. By the way, me sifting concrete is no different than me when I was sifting paper. It's like a similar process of literally sifting through the concrete, mixing the pulp together instead of mixing. It's just harder and like heavier. And I need a little more, I need muscles sometimes. But this is where I try to like put myself accountable in there, where it's like, I'm so happy like you could relate, because that's what I want, is people to walk on that sidewalk and see themselves and then go like, what does it mean for me to stand and walk? And you did that just like in this very moment, and that feels really good. And then again, like the outside, I'm trying to make space for others to contemplate their own existence around me, and then I'm going to contemplate my existence all around you. And that's where it's like, as an Arab, what does that mean to put myself in that cul-de-sac? What does it mean to merge all these things together, hold myself within it? And then there's a big moment of, am I holy, because Lebanese folks were very much for the revolution. Obviously, we need change. Like our banks have completely, infrastructure's failed. We're very attached to Palestine, Syria, Jordan. We're all connected, and we all fight for liberation that way. And then thinking about how hard that fight we go on there, but then we come into the States, like how like we just go to work, go to school, go home. It's like, are we essentially trading the revolution for the cul-de-sac? Are we trading that like fighting spirit that we have in us for that cul-de-sac? So that's where the kafaya, that's a huge significant marker of like that is like the symbol of liberation too. War and protest. What does it mean to embed that inside of that cul-de-sac? And this was like one of the most terrifying symbolically things to put together, because it could be so easy to see it in so many different ways. We are literally under the rubble, but when we're here, are we trading essentially the comforts of the cul-de-sac for the fight of the liberation that we generally would do at home because of those comforts? And then merging all those parts of me, that's when I started spinning. My head started spinning, and then I was like, I'm going to make this sidewalk spin. And you mentioned Valerie Thomas, the professor at Corona College, who
Vertigo.
Coined the term of diasporic vertigo, African diasporic vertigo. And I just want to take a moment to think that like all this unwrapping, this labor that I've done for my like within myself was because of like the guidance of literally like Black women writers.
Right on.
And philosophers. I should really make that acknowledgement, including Valerie Thomas, a contemporary right now writer too, who created African diasporic vertigo. Because all of that, like, it is for Black audience per se, but then it's like important that we unwrap that and go like, what does that mean? How am I interacting too? Like, in my place in all of this. And then within that of like that fragmented self, precarity of all of that, of like merging all of that fragmented self, and then literally getting your spinning, like your heart races, and it's like really difficult to like stand in that moment, because as POC across the board, Black, brown, we get used to like for survival too, depending on the privilege of how much you do it. We code switch, we change, shift, like with all versions of ourselves, but like switch which ones we heavily show, which ones we don't show as much, depending on like the crowd, the environment, and all of depending on the space and the people in the space. So to actually be my full self in space was like a huge act, and a hugely disorienting act. And within that discussion, when mentioned within Valerie Thomas, it's when Valerie Thomas was like, that is literally what the decolonization of the self is like. Colonization is what makes you fragmented. We come here and we like fragment into all these parts. So if you really want to decolonize yourself, then it's doing this work. I'm not ever,
particularly directed to the sidewalk. I think the idea, particularly right now, it's really interesting in the sense that it's like we have spent this unusual experience, group experience of all being confined inside, not having somewhat of a relief from these interactions, and having to have these exchanges, and even when interacting on the sidewalk, we had this 6 feet of distance that has just recently, relatively been removed. And we're all renegotiating kind of those spaces again, and how to interact and how to exist in that space after having, a bit of relief from this bit of space where we could exist as us, um, where you could exist with little less level of consideration of how that um, or what those consequences of just being you existing in a space might be, um, and how good that might feel. And going back to that, I think, that's one nice thing about, the kind of separation of the ability to sort of, or the ability to sort of separate from how things were going and have that experience of, even as bad as it was, having the experience of what is it like to not interact every single day with microaggressions. Um, and once you return back, how do you retain that space? How do you get back to that space? And how do you also accept that this is the me I want to be in this space now? And the way we were doing things, like, aren't working. And I think kind of combining just those ideas with just the basic material of things that we all um, are in the process of learning how to now renegotiate that space of, is really smart. It's a mouthful.
Mhm.
Right on. Exactly. Y'all are amazing. I think it's 5 o'clock or so. Our talk is around 4 to 5. I mean, do you have any more you'd like to ask? I just know there's so much we kind of broke down. Um, one thing I did realize that I didn't mention was you pointed out over and over again was my attachment to labor
Mhm.
constantly, and it's probably something that I could probably make a lot of artwork about and probably go to therapy over a little bit. Was this constant attachment to labor is like, because labor is so attached to value, is so attached to like my value as a human being too. And
Mhm.
that's something that I think that is to constantly work towards within my art practice, that trying to move, like maybe later on, I maybe I won't labor as hard, or maybe I will continue to labor just as hard. But like kind of also associating and realizing that like that labor like is like the dues we paid for being alive. Like that labor is like the responsibility I have to do beyond like work as a job, work for capital, work to live, but like this is the labor we have to do to be like, be like good citizens, because that sucks, not citizens to a nation, but like good, just to be people on this planet.
Yeah, there's like spiritual labor,
Yeah.
there's all these different type of labors that we need to engage in as human beings just to evolve and hopefully become better people and leave the world better than how we found it. And that's constant work. It's work that we individually have to do, it's work that we collectively do. And I think if you're an artist of your worth, it's work that you're constantly doing in your practice.
I also think it's worthwhile to highlight the just vapor of being that kind of highlight again, talking about the presence and the human existence, the exchanges, the interactions, the pushing yourself to be mobile, all these things, and just pushing yourself to despite things kind of interact in this world is a process of labor that we all go through in some way. and to highlight the kind of presence of that, the existence of that, even where it exists in, you know, the presence of being the street, of embodying that presence, and or whether highlighting that and how you take materials and put it together. But that labor is always been a essential thing that's been really fascinating to see how it evolves in your practice.
Okay, I think we'll end there.
Awesome.
Hugs.
Yay.
Y'all stay tuned. There's another talk coming up 5 o'clock right after this.